Hello, today's topic, religion and human freedom. This is Political Dharma, and I'm Alan Zundel. In my last episode, I was expanding Karl Marx's idea about economy being at the base of our social relations and expanded it to say that not only the economy, but also politics and religion are separate contributors to social reality, and all three of which have their own sources that are independent, somewhat independent of each other, but also very much intertwined, of course, in our daily lives. So the economy, that's one sphere, mostly involving how people work with nature in order to provide for our physical needs. The second sphere is politics, which was my focus in the last episode. This is how people relate to each other and the attempts of people to control the behavior and even the thoughts of other people. That is, exercise power and the construction of political power on those bases. And finally, today's topic is religion. Now, I want to go through this in three parts, pretty much as usual. I like the three-part division of a presentation. The first part is to review some of the things I had to say in my 3 episodes on socialism and spirituality about the relationship of socialists with religion, especially early on. And then I want to move from that to the further development of the study of religion and academia, and how at the turn of the century it became much more comparative and less focused on Western religions. And in the third part, finally, to talk about how today there's you could say there's an understanding that there's 2 different aspects to religion, an inner and an outer, and how that would influence our political practice, which is where I'm always trying to feed this toward, is what do these ways of understanding society, our the world that we live in, what does it have to do with how we can create a better world for ourselves and each other? All right. So thanks again for tuning in, whether you're watching on video on YouTube or you're listening to one of the podcasts. You can find one or the other if you go to politicaldharma.com, my website. But let's start right in on it. Point number 1, socialism, especially early on, was very associated with atheism, and a negative attitude towards religion. Not entirely negative, but in as reason had more freedom in the universities to be applied to various areas of life. That is, you had the Enlightenment emphasis on human reason and applying it to various aspects of life. And of course, the continuing demonstrations of how science, the application of human reason to understanding the natural world and controlling it, how that impressed a lot of people. So there was an application of the same, or at least an attempt to move in the same direction with understanding society and social reality. And so a lot of early socialists were exposed to these trends, that reason would be more skeptical, especially towards claims of the supernatural in history and in religious tradition. And some academics, especially theologians, who began working on analyzing the Jewish and Christian scriptures, trying to make sure they had accurate versions, the most accurate versions of the earliest forms of these scriptures, and trying to compare them to each other, compare the language, make more informed interpretations of them, trying to compare them to each other and to history. Say, for a big example here was comparing the 4 Christian Gospels, each of which tells a somewhat different story of the life of Jesus, and trying to figure out how you could understand why they each arose and had different takes on the life of Jesus. So all these things were fermenting, and there was a lot of skepticism in some circles, especially intellectual circles, towards religion, especially in the form of the Western traditions, Christianity in particular. We know that Karl Marx, when he first went away to college early in his academic life, before he graduated and couldn't find a job. He ran with a circle of people who were very much in this kind of mentality of being very skeptical of religion, being denying God, denying any supernatural elements, and seeing the church of the day very much allied with conservative tendencies, which means at that time support for the king and the aristocracy as against any type of representative government, a republican government as they called it. So somebody like Karl Marx, who was writing in a vein critical of Christianity in particular, and also against the monarchy and in favor of a republic, became a kind of persona non grata. Found it hard to find a job because of those reasons. And that's even before he became a socialist, which wasn't long to follow after this phase of his life. So a lot of negativity for religion. Now, I want to also emphasize what I said in that in those first series of videos on spirituality and socialism, which is that that's not the whole side of the story. It wasn't all a negative attitude towards religion. There were a number of people who were religious believers or had been raised religious and then had some of their beliefs or understandings about Christianity in particular stripped away from them, or even Judaism, the idea of miracles and that you could trust in a literal interpretation of the scriptures and all of that. Having that stripped away from them, they were still left with some of the emphases of their religious traditions on things like freeing the oppressed. Now, that's big in the Jewish tradition and the prophets, right? That you had been enslaved as Jews in Egypt, and now that you were freed by God, you should not be enslaving other people, but rather you should be taking care of the poor and oppressed. And a lot of those themes were carried over in some of the sayings of Jesus. And of course, Jesus is depicted as healing people, moving among the marginalized communities, and having ambivalent sayings about the authority of religious officials or government officials, which apparently got him in trouble. And of course, there's depictions of him constantly arguing with religious authorities and things like that. So this other tradition within religion itself of taking care of the poor and more of a democratic notion of all people are valuable and worthwhile, and questioning authority. So that fed into some people's socialist motivations, I would say, in their sympathies for the poor and the oppressed and the laboring classes. And then finally, I would also like to note this, that some of the Jewish and Christian traditions about how history was proceeding towards some kind of cataclysmic change and the end times seem to have carried over into some of socialism as well. Especially, you can see it in Karl Marx's writings, how he sees capitalism as moving towards some big final confrontation between the working class and the capitalist class that would result in a huge change and a very different experience of human life. That our needs would be met and we'd have abundance, and there'd be more human freedom and ability to develop into our full human capacities. Let me pick up on one more point on the socialist view of religion that I didn't cover as much. I don't think I mentioned it in the earlier set of episodes, and that is the idea of alienation. Probably, if you know much about Karl Marx, you're familiar with his writings about alienation and religion. Well, they weren't original to him. He picked them up from other people in his circle. But the general idea, of course, alien means somebody or some experience or land or culture that's very different from yours. So you feel it's like it's not part of your experience, not of you. They're different people. So you're distrustful of them and feel aloof from them, disassociated with them maybe. The idea was that what happened in the development of religion, that the source of it was that people early on didn't understand the forces of nature very well, so they assigned to them some kind of godlike powers that were influencing the lives of human beings, and extended it from obvious things like earthquakes and storms and the usual kinds of out of control natural things to observing the heavens and how the stars move and all that, how that might influence human beings. But the general idea was that they had been assigning to the idea of a god or gods. This is what it moved into, that there were gods behind nature, that people were alienated from their own human capacities, especially as a species, as in their group function, that we had the capacity to understand and control nature in a way we didn't realize, and we would project this ability into some imaginary god or gods, that they were the ones that had control. They were the ones that had this great wisdom and understanding that we didn't have. They were the ones that would love us and take care of us, which was really an expression of our human desires to fully flourish and to have communities in which we worked for the benefit of each other. So it was a projection. It was an alienation of our own human qualities, our own human potential into an illusory God. Now, I want to, as I move into this second part of today's presentation, I want to challenge that as an adequate explanation of how religion arose. That may be a big part of it. I think it probably is, that for a number of people, there's a psychological mechanism of projecting what ideal human qualities into some kind of God. And Christianity is very obvious. We have Jesus and the saints who have these this wisdom, this personal authority, these qualities of character that we can only aspire to. So this projection mechanism may very well be part of our attachment to religious traditions and how, in part, they arose. Religion is a very varied and complicated set of phenomena, especially if you look across time and different geographies. We have Eastern religions, we have Western religions, we have ancient types of religions, we have more modern forms of religion. Even within a single religious tradition, there can be a variety of forms and emphases, different beliefs, different ways of interpreting scriptures, different collections of scriptures, even different inclusions of various books in their scriptures. So a lot of variation in religion. So I would say there's a lot that feeds into religion, and it's not just a sense of alienation. They may be a small part of it, but there is something else going on. So moving into the second part, what happened is that the interest in religion among intellectuals, especially those attached to universities at first, moved more and more into comparative religions. There was a better understanding of history, better understanding of religions in other parts of the world, more opportunity to go and talk to people who practiced religions in other places, even to participate in them. And so you had a comparison of religions and an understanding of religious history that led to new types of ideas and understandings of religion. I'm going to mention a couple of figures that were key to the establishment of religious studies as a field, which really encompassed things like comparative religions, comparing different religions to each other, and careful study of the scriptures from a more, not skeptical so much as objective, trying to have an objective viewpoint on them, understanding their origins and meanings, and history, how religions developed over time, all that kind of stuff became more and more a part of it. So, number one, Rudolf Otto lived at the end of the 19th and into the early 20th century. That is, from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. He was a German professor, first of all, a theologian and a philosopher, but over time he became more interested in these various studies of religion, especially the scriptural studies, and he began to look into religions in other parts of the world and develop theories about their commonalities as well as their differences. So his main book was The Idea of the Holy, published in its German version in 1917. And here he outlined his belief or his theory that behind a lot of religious traditions, there was a unique human experience which was not reducible to other types of human experiences. One which had certain characteristics that make it unique, such as the sense of being in a state of total awe, in touch with some kind of greater reality, and just being overwhelmed by emotion. So I got a little stuck in there what I wanted to say, but the sense of it is human beings will in different cultures have this unique human experience of suddenly being caught up into something much larger, losing a sense of self into a greater reality, and feeling a sense of awe and what you might express as sacredness towards this experience. And so this was at the heart of religious experience, apart from all the stuff involving religious dogma and differences in practices between religions. So he was one, and that book was extremely influential in philosophy. A second one was William James. Again, he lived at the end of the 1800s into the early 1900s. He was an American professor, taught at Harvard University, was a doctor, a medical doctor, but he also was a founder of the field of psychiatry in the United States in particular. In fact, he was called the father of American psychiatry. And he also became interested in comparative religious experience. He thought this was the primary topic of religion that should be studied, as opposed to what he regarded as secondary phenomena like the history of institutions or the differing beliefs and dogmas and practices that they had in religion. So he began looking into and categorizing the various types of religious experiences, from visions and voices to this, similar to what Rudolf Otto was saying, some kind of overwhelming experience of the loss of the self being grasped by a bigger power. And it had other qualities, like it's very difficult to put in ordinary human language. So people having these experiences often resorted to metaphors, like this was an awakening or a rebirth of some kind. And it had, in the experience of people, some kind of quality of truth that's also hard to expect. That is, there was a sense that people had learned something or had gained something from this experience that could not be gained from other types of experiences or other forms of seeking knowledge. So both of these were founding the idea that within religious traditions, there was maybe this common experience that a number of people have had that then fed into the religious traditions that gave a more unique standpoint, so that perhaps people that were great religious founders or reformers, including Jesus, the Buddha, Muhammad, Moses, and others lesser known that came in as reformers of religious traditions, they had some kind of personal experience that gave them more insight into some deeper reality and more made them able to reform teachings and especially moral codes to be more in line with a general sense of oneness with other human beings, rather than becoming very rigid and only adapted to an older form of society. So all that coming out of it. Side note here is William James, I had a note, he also experimented with hallucinogenic drugs, which is part of the story as well, including peyote. So he had some idea of what he was talking about as far as visions and different types of experiences. So this thread continues on into the 20th century and affecting me as well. We had a lot of looking into mystical experience. By the turn of the century, there were people studying meditation from Eastern teachers, Buddhist teachers, and Vedanta teachers from the Hindu tradition, the Indian tradition, not American Native Americans, but India. Meditation, mindfulness, these types of deliberate training devices that were supposed to help people to move toward or to prepare the ground for a type of religious or spiritual experience. They might not use those terms, but some kind of human transformation of consciousness. So there's a lot of working with that. And then there was a recovery of Christian traditions of meditation and the mystic tradition of Christianity. And finally, a lot of experimentation with drugs, and also growing awareness that use of hallucinogenic drugs went way, way back in religious history to the traditional tribes and their shamans who would use drugs to really enter other worlds and gain new forms of knowledge. And that could be, the use of hallucinogenic drugs, a source of ideas about other worlds, other dimensions, other beings like angels and gods who come down and give us some kind of truth. So a sources for our social experience. There was a lot of S sounds, that these things are unique to religion, these types of experiences, and they feed, not unique to religion, but they're unique, they're apart from our economic and social experiences in general. That is, they don't have anything to do with political power necessarily or with economic relations, but they feed into these religious currents and these cultural currents and these moral currents that interact with political power and economic relations and the rest. And it kind of gets mixed into a bag where they each in their own sphere have their own course of development, and they influence each other, and there's tensions between them. So one final point on that, also this is something that I've looked into, is how now modern psychology and psychiatry is beginning to incorporate some of those traditions, especially mindfulness and meditation, into their practice, and finding it helps human beings transform and to overcome psychological issues, to gain a greater sense of freedom from within, a psychological freedom, and a freedom of a better insight into their own life and their own mind that helps them to navigate life more successfully. So finally, I'm moving into part 3 of this. And here I want to say, what can we glean from this? What is useful for us as political activists or people interested in socialism? And I want to say a couple of things here. First of all, understanding these types of religious experiences as a possible unique human experience that feeds into reality helps us explain history and politics and those developments, because obviously religion plays a huge part in politics, always has, to underwrite the authority of people in government, or to push things in one direction or another. We can see it in the United States in particular with all the evangelical Christians who are backing conservative movements, like the cause to outlaw abortion and other areas, particularly around gender issues. I don't know why that becomes the focus, but you see the intersection of religion and government authority all the time, and also justifying particular economic ideologies, which is even stranger combination, but it's there. So they interact, but religion seems to have some other types of human experiences feeding into it apart from politics and economics. But there's two sides to it. And here's a contradiction, like the contradictions in the economic system and the contradictions in the political system. There are contradictions in religious tradition. One is one I mentioned earlier, the obvious one, that every big religion is going to have multiple sub-traditions within it, and you can pick and choose whether you're going to focus on the ones that are more towards buttressing existing authorities and more towards supporting the poor, the oppressed, and the suffering. So those two traditions run through things, and you can focus on one or another to make a case or the side that really is on the same side as socialists would be, which is to give aid and help in oppression, in human suffering. So there's that particular contradiction or tension between various things you can draw out of religion, the various focus you can give to them. But another one that I haven't mentioned that I think is even bigger in a sense is the difference between inner source of authority and outer sources of authority. And here what I mean is that this, if it is a singular experience, this religious experience of gaining some kind of sense of truth about human life and reality gives support to practices of psychological healing and development that is giving greater freedom to people to find their own direction in life and to sort out what's going on inside themselves in a way that frees them from old patterns of behavior and old patterns of thought. So there is a sense that this one side of religion feeds into a support for practices that find authority within and try to draw out the meaning of that authority. That is, people can choose for themselves what to believe, and coming out of their own, not only their own experience of life, but some kind of inner authority, especially if it's cultivated and if it's over time. Various practices help you to deepen it or to experience this type of experience. Now, the other side, the other tension is that, say, some of the people having these experiences do feed into religion. Well, then religion has a lot of other people participating in it who are may not have that experience or may not have as deep an experience or just have different ways of interpreting the experience. So you have a sense of outer authority. And this is a big part of religion as well, that we don't trust what comes from within. We look toward outside authorities like scripture or an institution, a religious institution and its officials to tell us what's right, what's wrong, what to believe, what not to believe, whether to be supportive of government or critical of government. So there's an outer authority that can influence us. So I see both those things as present in religion, obviously, and there's a tension between them. The upshot is, for us who are working towards greater human freedom, greater human emancipation, the ending of suffering, those high values, I think we should be tolerant of religion. Let me address this to two sides of this. The people who have no interest in religion don't see a lot of value in it. I would encourage you to have a more open mind about the possibilities of cultivating some type of spiritual experience and become somewhat more religiously literate about the variety of forms of religion and religious experience, and welcome people into our circles who are more invested in religion because they may have a lot to contribute. On the other hand, I say people who are committed to a religious tradition of one kind or another, or a spiritual path that you've kind of put together for yourself out of whatever makes sense to you, available from this big spiritual smorgasbord that's now available in modern life. I would say also question aspects of what you've been taught or what you believe. Always look at it with a sense that maybe the picture you're getting is not the whole picture, and you should cultivate more of your inner experience and understand the reasons that other people are more skeptical of religion. And above all, whatever you're committed to in a form of religion, do understand it clearly. Don't just take a particular version of it, but look at it carefully, look at it, I don't mean critically in the sense that looking down on it or being negative toward it, but analytically. Apply your reason to what you're learning, what's being taught to you, to see if does this make sense? Are the claims they're making well-founded? Is their interpretations of scripture well-founded, et cetera, et cetera? So those would be my two forms of counsel coming out of this. So what have we learned? I hope, or at least this is what I'm proposing. You're free to disagree with me. I could be wrong on this. Number one, that there is a unique type of human experience that feeds into culture through religion in particular. And so it becomes part of the base of human society, along with political relations and economic relations. And number two, obviously, religion is a mixed bag. It's neither entirely negative or positive, but it has elements of each in it because a lot of human beings contribute to it in our human nature. We're very, we got a lot of different sides to ourselves. So religion is going to reflect that. I think some aspects of religion are more valuable than others, and they don't all mesh together well. So you have to be somewhat selective about what you're accepting and what you're not. That's it for this episode. I hope you got something out of it. Always interested in hearing what other people have to say. Again, you can find me on YouTube. You can find me through podcast platforms. Remember, if you got anything out of this, to like it, share, subscribe, help promote this so other people might get something out of it and can enter into conversation with me about it. And we end once again with a nice little song that was offered to me by Patty Rose that he and Joey Helfish composed. Until next time.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus. The moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.